Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Asar. We are going to get started on the after conversation. Just waiting for a few more people to trickle in. If you want to join the conversation and add your input, likes, dislikes the presentation, or just something that you want to add into the conversation, you can do so by clicking the link in the chat to where you can join the conversation that way live. You do not have to have your camera on. And just make sure your mic is working, you got a good connection. And, if not, you can still ask questions and make comments in the chat. So we're just going to wait just a few more minutes. I know people getting, something to eat, snack, and the like. So just enjoy the music, and we'll be back in just a second.
One. He's outside.
Okay. Lowering his volume down just a little bit. Thank you all for grooving with us. This is the Mbongi, and this is the after show for the conversation that we was having previously, where I made the argument that African Americans do not have their own culture. And, instead of making that a super long video, decided to just have a separate conversation. And this is where you all can chime in and give your opinions about the presentation, stuff that was discussed, stuff that was not discussed in the conversation, and just your overall opinions. So again, this is an open discussion. It's an open forum. So there is a link in the chat, on the YouTube chat, and on the Asar Imhotep Facebook chat. Um, it doesn't come through on Twitter, but we are streaming live on Twitter as well. But if you want to join the conversation, you will have to come either to Facebook or to the YouTube page and click on the link to be part of the panel discussion. Otherwise, if you're on Facebook, of course, or on YouTube, and you can type your comments or questions in the chat. So with us thus far, we have two brave souls who have decided to join the conversation. And this is Brother Wujaru, Sesh Metanetu group. And we have Issa the Black Telect, if I'm saying that correctly. If so, or if not, regardless, welcome to the Mbongi. And I'll start with Issa the Black Telect, and then we'll go to Brother Wujaru. Just kind of introduce yourself and let us know who you be
Yeah.
and what's your position.
Yes, brother. Greetings. This is Isa. We used to go back and forth back in the day on Kalam show and on
Issa,
Uncle Ket's. Peace
good
and
old
blessings,
Issa.
brother.
Peace. What's been good? Where you been? That's the question. Thought you'd have got arrested.
Bro, this.
Starting all that trouble. What's good?
Nah, it's just that's how it works. At Speaker's Corner, like the way it works is you go there for a few years and then afterwards it gets dry. Like, yeah, it just becomes so repetitive and boring. You take a few years out, then you really miss it. And I would say with the online, it was, yeah, things just, the world, the way it is, work and business and the rest of it takes over everything. So, yeah, but obviously my mind's always been on these issues. And I would say when it comes to me and Shakara, I would say, we've discussed having a few debates or discussions on these issues, and you seem to be coming from the same angle as him. Anyway, yeah, so introduce myself. I'm Issa the Black Telect, a Muslim who's more inclined or has 95 to 99% in agreement with the so-called Orthodox Shia. I would say I follow the Islam of the Quran, and therefore definitely not Orthodox. So yeah, I do have some disagreements with what the brothers are presenting from the Pan-African community and the Afrocentric community as regards to Asar Imhotep, Shaka Ra, and the other brother, I can't remember his name, the one with the glasses, the priest. Yeah.
With the glasses?
Yeah, the brother who's Sorry, that's it. Yeah.
Jabari,
So you'll have. Should I start my firing now at you, or wait till Wajaru introduce himself, or what?
We'll wait till Wajaru introduces himself. So, Brother Wajaru, the floor is yours.
Yeah, peace. Asar Motep. Peace, Issa. Long time no see, Issa.
Peace, brother.
Long time no hear from, man. You go way back to the Google Hangout days. Before
I know, brother.
Google switched up, yeah. And now we see each other on Facebook. So yeah, I'm just chiming in. Asar, I watched your entire presentation and lecture, and it was excellent. And the points that you brought out are very important. I think that are very important points that can't be microwaved or oversimplified. And I know that YouTube, we always try to limit the time because things can get very, very long. And so I think this will end up being a series of discussions. And so what I have on my screen right now is a discussion that I'm going to end up having. I wanted to have it today, but I may not have time. But it's regarding African and how we are simultaneously African and not African, or at the same time, we're African and not African at the same time, and what I mean by that and everything, which kind of merges with your discussion today. And then also what I would like to also discuss is more closer to your discussion lecture today, which is what I call defining the we, which is a culture as the basis for identity, a population becoming a people. And so as I sat here and listened to your lecture, I was like, man, this is right in the same line, the exact same line. So I appreciate everything you were saying today, and I will be stealing a lot of it. no, no, but no, it's along the same lines, and I agree with everything you pretty much said, everything you said. But the reason why I define it this way, or talk about it in this regards, defining the we, is because quote unquote we, even in our communication in every day, we say we, like we should do this, we should do that, but we never, and I'm using we as I say this, but we have never defined the we in the first place to even create the agency of doing this and doing that, so I'm taking it back a step back further to just emphasize that we need to define the we before the we can do anything, so anyway, but it's right in line with what you're saying, but I won't be doing it. I'll be doing it soon, so yeah, that's just my my intro. But I listened to your whole lecture, and I was watching the chat, and I will say this and then pass the mic. As I watched the chat, I was reading the comments, and I noticed this all the time, but especially today, is that I would recommend people to to do your best to refrain from chatting while a lecture or presentation is being done. If it's open discussion and interaction, yes, by all means, chat. But I'm saying this because I heard I read comments and people are making that the presentation is already handling and already taken care of, and things, and it throws the whole chat off if somebody else is also reading the chat. And I would just recommend people to kind of dial that back a bit, and wait for an after party like this. And I think that if we start having our methods this way, where we give a lecture and then fire up a after party, I think people will start getting used to it, and I think that would just be more effective. So that's it. That's my intro spill. And before I do mute myself, let me say peace to the brother Shaka Ra, who just popped in before he even introduced himself. Peace to you, brother.
All right. Yes, and to note that the reason why I have this discussion today is because of those previous discussions on the various other channels regarding the African identity question. And this was something that part of that larger discourse is, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I had a debate with the brother back in like 2010 or 2011, on this question. So I think the debate topic is, saying, are we, in terms of African Americans, are we Africans, or are we Africans with Americanisms, or are we Americans with Africanisms? And my position was we are Americans with Africanisms. And part of that conversation is what was brought into this discussion, and citing the relevant material. And so my position was that when we really examine what a culture is, beyond singing and dancing and food, we come to realize that African Americans do not have their own unique and distinct culture. We have adopted other people's cultures and modified some things, but we have yet to sit down and take inventory of who we are, organize, and create those necessary things to have our own viable culture that you can say is a culture in the fullest sense. And so that was the nature of the conversation. And so I want to welcome Shaka Ra to the program to the Mbongi. Peace and blessings. Kind of introduce yourself, and if you were able to see the previous discussion in part or in whole, what was your overall opinion, and then we'll start the round robin.
Tenda Mwari, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, Creator of the universe. Kuzai Muzimu Mukudo, give praises unto our great ancestors, Abibi Fahonie, Abibi Tumi, African liberation and African power for all African people. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. And peace to brother Asar, peace to brother Wajal, peace to brother Isa. And yeah, I was able to watch the presentation, brother Asar. To introduce myself, my name is Tafadzwa Shakara Bandaka, also known as the Shakara, lifelong Black nationalist Pan-Africanist organizer, Garveyite, African spiritualist, and African cultural scientist. Within the context of organizations such as the Al-Qibla Revivalist Movement, the UNIA ACL, and most recently the Black Star Action Network International. So conversations and discussions such as these are ones that I've been engaging with all my life, and so I harmonize very well with much of what you have shared, Brother Asar, and you are raising many of the points that are close to my own heart and my own work within our community, and so I look forward to having a fruitful and productive discussion around it.
I appreciate it. And I see we have a Shimsu Netcher. It looks like it's trying to join, but it says that your device is not connected, so I can't bring you into the fold. So you may want to. Oh, it looks like he's in there now. Alrighty. So yes, thank you for that. And lastly, introduce Shimsu Netcher. Introduce yourself and what is your position. Oh, we got Sister Emmy Ket in the building too, so we'll go to you afterwards as well.
This is Brother Shimsu Netcher out of Detroit. I do believe you make some valid points, but I've known Africans, like you said, you're talking about culture. They don't necessarily define themselves just as Africans. They like Igbo. If they are Igbo, they'll say that they're Africans, but they focus more into who they are as a collective. They'll say Igbo or a particular community they're a part of. They just don't go as broad as just to say they're African, I find.
Indeed, and I don't think that, at least I don't believe I implied that, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So I appreciate you joining the conversation and for your input. And for Sister Emmy Ket has joined. Please introduce yourself, and if you caught the conversation, what is your opinion on the shenanigans that I said?
Hote, habari. Yeah, I actually did tune in, and I agree with everything you said, really, because I can, while the things that you were sharing, while you were reading them, I was just trying to, in my head, compare them with, with how, my surrounding, especially growing up in Kenya and, being from, being that I am Luo, and seeing, other tribes and other ethnic groups, and comparing, why it is that we say, I am of this culture and the next person is of this culture, and things of that nature. For me, it made absolute sense. I might not have actually thought of everything, while living it in that sense, but how you break it down, that's what it is. It makes absolute sense. You have to have a culture, and there are certain things in our culture that defines what a culture is, as opposed to what you say, there are expressions. So to me, I totally agree with that, and obviously I agree because that's what I've seen all around me. I've also seen it even after moving out from the continent and moving to Denmark, where I actually had the chance to also interact with other Africans from, different coastal areas like West Africa and things of that nature. That's the first time I actually saw all the similarities that I grew up with coming out from East Africa, and then I had my best friend is from Gambia, and my other friend is Nigerian. So we always had these similarities growing up, and we would go to each other's houses and things that we had to abide by and talk about and things of that nature. So it brought my mind to a bigger context of just the similarities of why this culture is that this culture and that culture is that culture. So I have no contentions at all with it, and I would actually suggest people to get more involved with this kind of talks, because once you have that particular once you find yourself and you root yourself to a particular culture, then everything else that comes on the higher level becomes easier, and makes sense, because first you have to define yourself on a smaller level, like how you would define yourself. I am from this family. Then from that family you can be, then the bigger part of the family and the bigger part of the neighborhood and the bigger part of the city and all that starts to make sense. So, but the rooting has to come in place from the foundational part at the bottom part. And if that is not, settled, then everything falls apart. So, anyway, to summarize, I have no contention with what you said. 100% with it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, like people, like I was watching a lecture last night. I'm familiar with the presenter, but I've never heard him speak. So I wasn't even sure if he was still alive. But the lecture may have been done 3 years ago. But this is Magobe Morose, something like that. And I think he's originally from Zimbabwe. And, he's written a lot on Ubuntu and the concept of Ubuntu. And so he has a whole text on African philosophy of Ubuntu. And one of the things he was talking about in the lecture was, how do you define a muntu, a human being, a person? And I've written and discussed this before, especially within the context of my argument that white people are not human, right? And I go into the general African consensus on what it means to be human in terms of it being connected to your character. And he reinforced that notion in the conversation when he said that a muntu is someone who embodies and practices Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the ethical aspect of Ubuntu. And it helped to, kind of shape certain aspects of the conversation of today when I was talking about like how the culture is created to create a certain type of human being. And for many of the so-called Bantu cultures, it is Muntu. Muntu is the ideal being, but he's the ideal being that embodies Ubuntu. You have a word and a phrase for the very character that embodies the very characteristics for which the human being, the Muntu itself, is supposed to embody. And a whole philosophy and tradition is built around that, in the same way that in ancient Kemet, Osiris and Isis are the embodiments of what it means to be the ideal human being. And the principle in which that ideal human being is labeled, Ma'at. Ma'at is the culture. Ubuntu is the culture. Iwa Pele among the Yoruba is the culture, right? And so when we look at in the African American space, what do we call that human being? And what do we call that series of characteristics and things for which the human being is supposed to be the embodiment of? And this begins the conversation of understanding where this notion that African Americans have their own unique culture versus just simply a reactionary culture, a maladaptive reactionary culture to the oppression and things that we have experienced here. while maintaining certain of the Africanisms that we were able to maintain because we were put in ghetto conditions, and then but not systematizing and organizing that into a viable culture like many of our brothers and sisters have done historically in Africa itself. And so I wanted to bring it back to Brother Issa, since he seems to be the only major dissenting voice. And so I want to give you the floor to speak your mind on what you disagree with.
Okay. Thank you very much. I've got several issues, but I mean, let me try and start with something like a question. So basically, have any of you thought about your paradigm, your perspective of calling yourselves Africans in that sense, as in the European labeled this place, conquered how they did, saw it through their paradigm, called it Africa, then wrote a whole heap of material, made all that kind of media, movies, etc., using that term, and made sure that the world in general saw us as primitive savages, etc., under the term, label, and identity of Africa and Africans. Would somebody or a group, let's say, of people that were taken with us, but maintained their traditions, let's say of the Yoruba, of Voodoo, the Ifa, etc., and they still spoke the language, they still had the mentality passed down, would they agree with calling themselves Africans and going about the way that you all are going about it, this kind of approach? Because me personally, I think for us who are the diaspora, I think that's a major block. I think that's a major obstacle for a lot of people out there who are coming out of Christianity, who haven't gone through the Nation of Islam or Hebrew Israelite or Black Hebrew Israelites, however you want to call them. All those who are, because they generally convert to other stuff like, Salafi Islam or whatever else. Do you see what I mean? So do you think that is something that you'll follow because you've still sort of held onto the rope of the European?
It's interesting you asked that question, because that was one of the points that the professor, Dr. Ramose, addressed as well, and he mentioned that he's going to use the term African with reservation, and recognizing that for now people will know and understand that term and what it means, although he is reluctant to use it. And so he also mentioned that this is conversation amongst colleagues and many African people in terms of still using the term African itself. And this is something that I've addressed, many times before. And that's why I went through the process of renaming Africa to a term, Bukanda. Bu being a prefix for place, right? Or you can say the place or the land of Bu, right? It's where we get the term Buganda. The B has been dropped since we now say Uganda. But Buganda is the same, it's the same word, it's just the velar sound has been voiced. Ganda instead of Kanda. But Kanda, in variations of the word, is even cognate with the word Kemet of ancient Egypt. This is the most widespread term to relate to land as well as community and people, because there's a relationship conceptually between land and community and the person. And so they often use the same name for both. So grounded in African languages, African cultures, and finding a term that is widespread in its current form, as well as its mutations in terms of sound, I suggested the name Bukanda for Africa. So while I still use the term Africa because this is a rather new suggestion for people, and I know it would take a while to catch on. I still use African because that's what people are used to hearing. But the fundamental issues with that term, and it being a colonial term, and we don't know what it means, and so I'm always basing my stuff on African culture, which requires that when we self-identify, that there's a meaning that resonates with the spirit of the people and the vision and purpose of the people itself. And so with that said, I find Africa as an inadequate term to properly represent the people in this geographical space. And Bukanda is something that I suggest is more relevant and at home than the term Africa itself, which actually may come from a Berber group called the Ovriga. And it's interesting because the word Ovriga is cognate with the word Hebrew or Ibrahim. And so in essence, when you call yourself an African, in many respects, you're still calling yourself a Hebrew. And it has to deal with, the wandering and passing by people identified because of their nomadic life, the Ovriga. And so that's, neither here nor there. But to answer your question,
so let me just
that's my...
Thanks. No, but it's brother. It's more to do with what it entails rather than just a label. So, for instance, when you will call something non-African culture, that would then relate to geography. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're still coming in and out.
Hello?
Yeah.
But when you're referring to non-African culture like Abrahamics and whatever else, or Semites, etc., and you refer to their culture as the other, you're joking. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you were fine.
Peace. Can you hear me, bro?
You're fine. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so what I'm saying is it's decided where those borders and boundaries would be, right? And I personally believe that if Kemet was in what they call sub-Saharan Africa, you all probably wouldn't care about what's above it, right? So if you all was to, let's say, relabel it, what would be the boundaries you would set? Because when we look at East Africa with their so-called Semitic languages, etc., Amharic, Ethiopic, and so on, which is so related to the Hebrew and Arabic and Aramaic, etc., you still consider that culture African and those people as African people. So it becomes, this is where I'm saying a lot of it becomes problematic, not just with the label and term Africa and being African in relation to that, but also the boundaries, also what is the, the cultural standards that you set for what is African and what is not African. Do you see what I'm saying with that question?
Yes, and the geography is fluid. Now, I don't consider the Semites. I'm hearing an echo on your end, so if you can mute your mic for a moment. I don't consider the Semitic languages African languages for a number of reasons, and there's history, and that's a whole lecture unto itself, and this is a strictly a linguistic issue here. But the same questions that you raise in regards to the geography, I've raised in regards to quote unquote religion. So when I suggested Kimoyo as the name for the dominant religious framework on the continent of Africa, I did it in a way that it allows for fluidity and won't be restricted by the modern borders, because it's defined by certain characteristics. in terms of the belief system. And so it may ultimately be that there are other groups in the world who, based upon the criteria that dominates in Africa, fits under Kimoyo. They just wouldn't be a continental African Kimoyo, but it'd be Kimoyo nonetheless, right? And so this allows us, one, not to kind of lump everybody in the same basket, because we may have other traditions whose major characteristics don't fall under the Kimoyo umbrella, and those would be just as African as anything else. And so we're starting this process of defining these terms. Now, I don't think that if Kemet was in sub-Saharan Africa or if it was in China that we would care. It's not based upon Kemet. Kemet's I guess value to Africa in many respects is because we see the African cultures expressed in Kemet, in terms of its language, in terms of its kingship, in terms of its kinship, in terms of its rituals. All of that stuff, every single aspect of it can be found throughout Africa using the same names in the same way. And so it becomes problematic when you have individuals like Azahi Hawass, who says that Egypt has nothing to do with Africa and Africans, quote. And we're looking at it like, are you serious? First of all, you see these black people with afros and they're speaking African languages and they're practicing African religions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're described as such by people who are on the outside looking in, who have met the people. This becomes a different, issue and conversation. So if we found that at the level that we can do, for example, between Wolof and ancient Egyptian, between Yoruba and ancient Egyptian, between Congo and ancient Egyptian, if Egypt was in China, it would still be the same thing, because it's not simply based on geography. Egypt is African by default because of its geography, but that's not the argument. That's not simply the argument that we're making. It becomes an argument because, Egyptologists and just Europeans in general have become creative and just took Egypt out of Africa and given its modern borders and then labeled it in this fictional Middle East, right? So that becomes problematic. So we have to stress that, something that's obvious. Like, here's the borders of Africa. Egypt is in Africa. It's an African civilization and religion. So outside of just the bare geography, we're arguing based on color, based on the range of colors, based on the language, based on the culture, that these people cluster with the rest of the Africans who live west and below the Sahel, quote unquote, Sahara line. But that's neither here nor there. The issue here for today is the African Americans, and whether what we have is adequate for us in terms of, we're hearing the echo again, Isa. He'll be back. Whether the what we have is adequate enough to be called culture, given the various criterion of culture that has been articulated by various scholars over the years. And so I'll leave the floor open to anyone who wants to make a comment about anything. Don't all speak at once.
Yeah, I know he bumped off. I was trying to get his line of reasoning, behind the questions and things. I was going to ask him, and he's back now, how much of the presentation that he saw, because
because that was addressed in the presentation.
Yeah, it was addressed. Not only was it addressed in the presentation, but you made some key points in the presentation of pulling the cart before the horse, type of thing, and I think that's very, very important, in terms of. And then one thing that I didn't hear you mention in your presentation was the actual psychological conceptualization of this entity called African. You know, like, what is that? You know, in the consciousness of the people themselves. Like, you know, like, for example, and I don't want to defer the conversation in a direction, but just to show that this was not talked about, like the concept of the African continent as a single anything. You know, was that in the consciousness of people? Of course, now today it is, because we have international travel and you know, in modern times. But if we walk backwards through time, that our concepts of that did not exist even in the minds of the people. And so I think we have to bear that in mind in you know, within this conversation. But I know your lecture didn't really go into that, and so I don't want to take it into that and then you know, miss the points that you actually did raise. So I think that Issa's question is following along that pathway. I think that's a separate conversation to have.
I bring this up on Garfield show, and you know, one of the recent discussions that we had that um, you know, kind of sparked this conversation today. But you know, along those lines, I forgot the exact date that it was published, but it was published probably like between 5 and 7 years ago, and I saved it and I reposted it here on my Facebook page. And this is a blog written by an individual by the name of Obodo Dima Oha, right? And the title of his article or his blog was "Being African Without Knowing It." And this speaks to fundamentally your recent your comment that you just made. So this is an individual who was of Igbo descent who had a conversation with his grandmother. So his grandmother is still alive. This is, you know, anywhere in the 2000s to, you know, at minimum probably the 90s, right? That this conversation was had with between him and his grandmother, who of course is also of Igbo descent. So he says, my maternal grandmother, who died some years ago at a very ripe age of 120, or so we imagine, for none of her offspring could tell when she was born, did not know she was African. I had cause to ask her one day whether she knew she lived on a large continent called Africa and had an African identity. She looked at me with great amazement and answered, Abu Monye Uri. Indi be Anyi Bu Indi Igbo. I'm messing it all up, but it translates as, I am from Uri. Our people are Igbo. Grandma lived and died Onye Uri, an Uri citizen, and Onye Igbo, an Igbo person. There was no argument and no evidence I presented that could convince her that she was otherwise. She believed that no one had a right to put her where she did not belong or desire to belong. Her own time, imagination, and science educated her that the next clan was another nation, even if that other clan spoke clear Igbo, had similar gods, or celebrated similar festivals as those of Uri Nation. I'm gonna pause right there because this goes to the question. And remember, one of the 9 laws of culture that I created. The first one is culture is conscious of itself. And so she is conscious, the grandmother here, that she is an Igbo of Uri citizenship. She is an Igbo Uri. That is her identity. She has no idea what an African is, where Africa is. So she's not conscious of being an African. So you can't tell her that she's an African. And not only that, this speaks to another aspect of African cultures and history, is that you can have people who speak the same language and live a certain distance and will be considered another nation. Now, keep this in mind when we're studying ancient Egypt, and you find these different deities and different stories and anything in these different locations. It's possible that, you know, people in Thebes thought of people in Heliopolis as a totally different nation of people, even though they're in the same political geographical territory. But that's another conversation for another day. So I'll continue. Being Uri and being African at the same time was, for her, one of those confusions introduced by those who attended the white man's schools, worshiped the white man's gods, and spoke the white man's language, and bore the white man's names. So all you Negrofied people, these white man's names, and worshiping their gods and things, yeah, trying to impose Africanness on African people. Grandma had a right to refuse Africanness and to insist on her Uri-ness. Remember that culture is conscious of itself. She has no understanding of what that means to be African, so she has no sense of Africanness. And this is ultimately what I argue in the issue of Kemet, meaning black people. There's no sense of blackness and racial culturalness in ancient Egypt. I won't start that debate today. Not that she detested being African or that she did not have dark skin. Her own cultural education instilled on her mind a strong conviction that a group of people cannot be named or even renamed by another. She believed that a name given to a group of people by another group is merely used in teasing or insulting them. Her own theory says that there is a difference between what a group calls itself and what others prefer to call that group. If my grandma would not accept being African, how could she possibly accept being Nigerian? She did not need Chukwu Omeka Odumegwu Ojukwu to tell her on Radio Biafra that she was not a Nigerian citizen, or that Gowon was forcing people to abandon their true national identities to become Nigerian. Grandma told me that with great excitement in her eyes, how her husband's father, a man with an admirable sense of freedom, had not only refused to pay taxes to the white man and the colonial and blah, blah, blah. Let me see. I'll skip that. So what's the difference between paying taxes? Great grandpa was making a philosophical statement through the charge that Grandma indeed opened another direction of her learning for me. I was told at school that I was African, living on a continent called Africa, and I accepted this without asking the relevant questions. After my encounter with her over an Africanness she would not accept, I was compelled to begin to ask those questions. Who named Africa, and what does the name mean? Existing publications seem to justify Grandma's theory that accepting to answer African rather than to an Uri person is to barter one's true history for another group's fables. And then it goes on to discussing possibly where the name Africa came from. But this is something that I've addressed in my Bacala of North America publication, and addressing the issues that come along with even accepting the concept of Africa and it not being birthed from one of us and being organically accepted by everyone with a full understanding of what it means, what is the purpose of the label, and what are the intentions for grouping everyone together. And that was in the spirit of the United States of Africa, Pan-Africanism, and building a single political unit and culture from which we can pull our resources to fight internal and external threats, as well as to build a strong and economic system. And so I think that reinforces much of what you were saying, Brother Wujawu. And I want to get either Shimsu Netcher or Shakara or Imiket's opinion, or you want to add to the discussion.
Brother, so I had a question for you. The sectarianism that we now see in Africa, and could that be in the nomadic situation with due to the invasion of the Europeans? Could that be the sectarianism that occurred? Is that because of the invasion of the Europeans, or was that happening prior to the European invasion?
I do apologize. I don't quite understand the word that you're using. Can you please define what you're saying? I'm not sure.
The certain we use the word tribes in Africa. You have very, like Chancellor Williams talks about in Rebirth of African Civilization, that somebody like, for example, from Detroit can speak entirely different language from somebody in Pontiac. So due to the fact of Europeans invading Africa and they becoming nomadic, moving in different locations and trying to get away from the invasion, could like you talked about the Igbo, is she not identifying herself with Africa? Could that be because of the fact of that invasion, or was they dealing with a lot of this type of tribalism prior to the European?
Well, we got to understand that the idea of Africa is a European invention. It's just as Brother Esau mentioned earlier. They set the borders in 1884 and 1885.
Berlin Conference.
Correct. And divided the continent. The Africans themselves had no concept of a continent in the way that we understand it today. And they did not divide naturally the landscape into these artificial borders. There was no Nigeria, there was no Sudan, there was no Congo in that way. There's no such. South Africa isn't even an African phrase or label and language. Like, we didn't create any of that. And so by cutting these borders, you automatically as well impose a secondary level of identity in terms of the state that they've created. And so we're saying tribalism, but it's not tribalism, is nationality. These are nations, different nations that existed, who operated and had different subsistence strategies, different modes of production. Some are farmers, some are hunter-gatherers, some are nomads, nomadic pastoralists, etc. And so the landscape was just different, and they had their own identities. And unfortunately, especially here in the United States, because we are genetically Pan-African and culminating into this entity we call African Americans, we believe that the continent of Africa was somehow united before slavery. Right. And we seem to view pre-colonial Africa in a kind of a unified state instead of different nations, living, existing, and vying for resources in these different geopolitical spaces. And so this is one of the things that I try to stress in these conversations, is that we must not mistake the ideal for the future that we want for Africa and mistake the idea that hasn't been realized yet as a reality that is present now and was present in the past. And that seems to be the issue here. where Pan-Africanism right now is an idea, an ideal as well as an idea, to be realized in full in the future. What I'm arguing for African American full identity and culture is an ideal to be realized in the future. I have to first recognize that, you know, what we're seeking isn't present at the moment. And so this will allow us to create the very institutions and systems to put in place so that we can realize that ideal, so that we can utilize now our combined resources and systems of relating to build the kinds of economies and things that we want and desire for our children, right? And so that, you know, I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, absolutely.
In that sense.
And what we can, as a worldwide, I'm talking about far as people, we as a people, white supremacy, it seems like if you go to Europe, they're dealing with the same situation, white supremacy. You see the situation in Ukraine, how Africans are being treated in Ukraine. They collectively, wherever we go, treat us the same way. But I think that we can build based on Pan-Africanism, based on the collective agenda, that there is a systematic global attack on African people worldwide. And so I think with Mr. Garvey, where he was successful, I know it's a lot of issues with Mr. Garvey, but what he was successful of bringing different people into this organization is that they saw the inhumanity towards Africans, whether they be in Brazil, whether they be in Jamaica, whether they be in Africa. What was successful as a basis of where the struggle could begin is that we were being attacked systematically worldwide.
But this is like Ukraine is a perfect example of how weak Africa is.
Yes, very good point.
Right? Mm-hmm. Because first and foremost, I'm not saying that students cannot, you know, if they have the opportunity, go get educated where they can, but there really shouldn't be any reason fundamentally why those Africans couldn't be well educated in Africa.
I agree.
In African universities and institutions, and it prepared them to be able to go into their own communities and build it up and live comfortably, like other nations have been able to secure for their people. Mm-hmm. We understand it's a bit more nuanced. There's history and colonialism and corruption in certain places, but that's just the point. The point is that people, in order to get an education, Africans are leaving Africa to go to the United States, to go to Europe and Asia to get these educations, and many of them are just staying. They're not coming back. They didn't have the policies like China had, where you go get the education, but you come back here and teach. Mm-hmm. You help build up China. And because Africans have been kind of, you know, individualizing themselves, they don't understand that in many respects, like it's starting to happen now. Really, it is, because they're getting so fed up with the racism and things in these other countries that they're coming back slowly but surely, you know, to help build up, you know, their own communities and the like. And this is just what needs to happen, is that we need to be able to create our own, like Africa should be a safe haven for Africans. Like we should be able, like, oh, y'all don't want to release our African, we should have a ship on the way.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You know, to get our people out of Ukraine, and any white people trying to get on board, no.
And they have the resources to be that way.
Exactly. I mean, this is what, because we don't have a United States of Africa. Mm-hmm. This is problematic, because we're saying African, but where are they from specifically? Are those Sudanese? Are they, you know, Nigerian folks? Where are they from? Are they from Ghana?
And this speaks to a topic that I'm also going to bring up and kind of go into more detail about the fact that Africa is not a country, but it's
That's
spoken
continent.
of. Yeah, but see, when I say it, everybody's like, duh. You know, if I say, hey, Africa is not a country, they're like, duh, of course it's not. It's a continent.
Mhm.
But aside from that, the way, if you just sit back and observe the way that Africa is talked about in from media, journalism to the everyday conversations that we have, people speak of it as if it's a country. And there's a lot of books and materials written about this phenomenon, and I think that's problematic. That's very problematic because it kind of what do you call it? It kind of what do you call it? Weakens our motivation to really have a proper understanding of where the power lies in Africa, within the African countries, and what can be done and cannot be done. You know, so like the example you said with Ukraine. And you just asked the question. Well, we're saying Africans, but where are they from? Because there's no political entity, there's no polity called Africa that could do anything.
Exactly.
So it would be the government of the individuals, whatever membership nation that they're part of, that's a responsible party. Same way as America. There's a African American, I believe.
Brittany Griner.
Yeah, she had issues in Russia, and for the United States is the responsible party because she's an American, not because she's African or anything like that. And so that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of making something happen. You know, the American consulate, embassy, or whatever the case is the point of contact for action. And so it's specific down to the nation and not continents. And I think that's a serious conversation that needs to be had. And I'm willing to have, and you know, I did a post on Facebook about that. But you know, but that's kind of like a side conversation to what Asar discussed today. So so I don't want to take it there, but yeah, but that needs to be had.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add into, I think, what Asa said, just so people understand it clearly. And I think in my answer on one of the a point that Shamsu Necho brought up. So when you talk of nations, obviously countries are, and in this context, African countries, those are modern demarcations. So then you have tribes. So you have tribes that find themselves landlocked within a particular border. And actually some tribes or ethnic groups actually will be divided right across the border, where you have them a particular ethnic group being you know, nationals of two different countries, sometimes even three. You have cases like the Maasai, you have cases like Luo people, you have people like Yoruba, you know, that, you know, and just all around across the continent. But I think from what Asa was reading, you know, for before colonialism, when you say nation, the ethnic groups will look at themselves as a nation. So, and in the example that he brought up with what was the name? The author was talking about his grandmother who was
The
part of a
Igbo, Uri Nation.
Uri nation, right? So it's not a country, but that it would be the Uri nation. So that's what it was. Now we have
But
to
that
keep
would be a country.
right. So
You
that
know,
would
it
be
just wouldn't be the modern nation state in the territory size that we think of. But you know, a territory is where a group of people occupy a space. So
correct.
wherever the Uri people is, that would be the Uri country. That would be the Uri nation. You know,
Correct.
that would have been a state. That's why you have like Ogun State in Nigeria and Oshun State. These are actual state. These are actual countries. But the colonialists in 1884-85 divided and created their own states. You know, without any conversation with the people on the ground, and that's what's problematic. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, that's fine. That actually explained it very well. So when you talk of nations, you have to you know, you have to know in what sense, because those people will see themselves as a nation. Now in terms of the modern you know, what we call nations, it is a fact that you know, that African people on a continent are actually in the process of learning nationhood, in the sense of nationhood in terms of the new demarcated borders, because those people never saw those particular borders as the nation, but there's their own groups as this nation, and then you have the other nation. So nationhood, as in being Kenyan or being Nigerian, that is something that we know that that's something that we are in the process of learning, and it was introduced from the late 50s, especially with Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, especially him coming from Tanzania, and he did a good job of actually collecting all the different ethnic groups within Tanzania and having them having pride in that particular whole group, as opposed to the small groups, even though those smaller groups of the ethnic groups still exist and still identify themselves as such, but there's also this pride in the nationhoodness of things. So that, but in other countries on a continent, that is something that people are in the process of. But I just wanted to say that in saying that, we don't want to just jump jump steps in this discussion and start talking about the ideal of the unification in terms of that, because when that is being talked about, you have to keep in mind that people on the continent already have themselves identified in those smaller groups, or the smaller level of the tinier level of identification, where it goes to all the way to ethnic groups, to clans, to sub-clans. So that for the continental Africans, that's already set. So then when they start to work on the other upper levels, like nation, going through like the regions where you have East Africa, West Africa, then you have the continental level of identification, they can go through that with the lower level already intact. Now, this particular discussion was about especially the African Americans, where that particular lower level is not intact yet. So we don't want to jump steps and start talking about something on the top level where everything below is still broken. So I just wanted to add that to kind of make sure that we don't go over the top and start talking about all the Pan-Africanists and all that kind of stuff, while the meat of the issue is that at the bottom level something is not fixed yet.
Right. Good point. I like that.
Yeah. So I guess there's a lot that I agree with, and there's a lot that I disagree with. The first thing is, one of the things that resonate with me most about Brother Asar's presentation is the segment that he dealt with on identity, particularly with relation to the quotations from Nana Amos Wilson. Very familiar with those quotations, and he breaks it down exceptionally well. Yeah. And so we understand from those quotations that identity is inherently political. Yeah. And what we identify with, I don't think he used this particular quote, but there is a section in Falsification of African Consciousness, in which he says words to the effect that what we identify with defines for us what we sacrifice for, what we think is good, yeah, and so on and so forth. All right, and so I want to highlight that we should not just accept, yeah, we have to be critical about every level of the conversation that we're having at the moment, yeah, because if we study the works of people like Sheikh Anta Diop, and people like Teofila Benga, and people like Kwesi Pra, and others, they discuss the impact that the colonial process had not on just the creation of larger nation states, but how the colonial process actually redefined people group organization indigenously among Africans on the continent. Yeah. So even the concept of tribe is a colonial creation. Yeah. And we have to analyze that and what that means. And we also have to analyze the ways in which indigenous people groups were also co-opted into the colonial process for the sake of facilitating colonialism, and how that changed over time people's senses of themselves. Yeah, and we're not making these things up. You have brothers and sisters that will tell you about the creation of royal families where they did not exist, the creation of centralized authorities where they previously did not exist. Yeah, but then there's also the fact that we don't live in a history. We're not inheriting a history of just smaller social groups that are referred to as tribes. There are larger political group organizations in pre-colonial Africa also. All right, so all of that has to be factored into the conversation. But I think that the intentionality behind Robert Assar's presentation is fundamental. Yeah, because whereas it said we're focusing on the smaller first, I think we're actually doing both at the same time. We're understanding the macro in relation to the micro, and the micro in relation to the macro. And that speaks to the fact that we don't use the fact that a particular context did not exist in history as a reason for negating the possibility or the need for that in our present and or our future. And within that context, we have to look at the ways in which this consciousness of Africanness comes about and why. Yeah, and the fact that some Africans didn't adopt it or wouldn't adopt it for whatever context, does that delegitimize the concept in and of itself? And even if, let's say, for example, the concept is actually born in the diaspora, yeah, and actually reflects the unique history, yeah, of Africans in the diaspora, all right, does the fact that it is developed among Africans in the diaspora, let's say before, if it was the case, it was before, yeah, Africans on the continent, does that negate the experience of Africans in the diaspora and the necessity for creating this African consciousness within the context of where we are segmented within a diaspora context, right? So this is the point that is being made in the sense of the fact that when we look at Africans anywhere in the world, most of us, yeah, it's not just on the continent, most of us don't regard ourselves to be part of any larger group. Jamaicans see themselves as Jamaicans. I'm got family from Jamaica. Antiguans see themselves as Antiguan. I've got family from Antigua. So that's not unique to the African continent. Yeah. But the challenge is looking at our political, economic, and social context in this day and age, in pre-colonial, sorry, not pre-colonial Black Africa, Anthropological Prisons by Kwesi Pra. He speaks about the challenge of finding optimal political and social groups in order to solve the problems that we need to solve in today's world. And I think that the context for what Brother Assar presented today and the need for a particular identity that grounds us within Africanness within a particular context is essential to that process.
Yes, I appreciate it. And what you
Yep.
just, the latter part of what you just spoke on speaks on to something that Sheikh Anta Diop discussed in Black Africa, an economic and cultural basis for a federated state. One of the things that he mentioned was that there was, at least at the time of the writing, there was no inter-African tourism. And this is essentially what we want to do. It's like we can be individuals and develop and cultivate our individual group self.
Right.
But what we want to do is create safe spaces and havens to where when we want something different, you know, like I enjoy Chinese food every now and then. I enjoy Mexican food every now and then. You know, I enjoy Akan and Wolof food every now and then. I enjoy Ethiopian food every now and then. The point is to have a network and a space for when you have those types of tastes and interests, you can go there and you can share and exchange money with each other. So when people talk about going on vacation, they want to go rightfully so to the Caribbean islands, but I hear many people want to go to Europe and into France, into England, and they pride themselves on going to Spain and going to Dubai, skip all over Africa, you know, go all around Africa to go to Dubai and go to China and Japan. Why isn't there more of us saying, you know, we're going on a family vacation to Mozambique, to South Africa, to Nigeria, et cetera, et cetera? Like, why aren't these vacation destination spots where we can come and have and stay at Black-owned hotels and you know, buy from local merchants, et cetera, and the same here. Like, when they come to the United States, we need to have safe havens in little Africas where there's you know, pockets of African American businesses and African businesses, marketplaces where we can do business with one another and build and learn, and from there be able to expand and do some other things that will come down the line. But this is the vision that, you know, Sheikh Anta Diop had. I'm sorry, somebody else is trying to come in.
Well,
sorry,
go ahead. I just wanted to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, sorry. Very quickly, I was just going to say that the other thing is that, because so in Black Africa as well, Diop speaks about the fact that the segmentation and fragmentation of different African states, larger nation formations, and the colonial process obscured a particular kind of history. For example, that the fact that you had lingua francas and trading languages among certain groups of people, and because of the rewriting of the history and the negation of the historical record through time, that history had been forgotten. And also in relation to the article that was read in relation to grandma, who understood herself as Uri, a subgroup among the Ibo, that fact, which is real, right, and we have to factor that into any analysis that we're going to make, but then that fact doesn't negate the broader fact, in the sense of, if we identify, as Diop put it, the cultural unity of Black Africa, grandma's personal purview in that regard does not negate the broader reality, yes, of the cultural unity of Black Africa. So because grandma doesn't recognize that, that doesn't mean that is not a fact, and a fact that can be utilized and wielded towards a greater formation that will enable us to solve many of our problems in today's world.
I just wanted to say, I think that what I observe, right, I think that we need to spend some, not we us just here, but us collectively, I think we need to spend a little bit more time on crystallizing the awareness of the different layers of identity, because I think people either don't understand the different layers. I think people don't know that different layers exist, first of all, and then even if they know the different layers do exist, that they may not understand the role that each layer plays. And because in all my years in these discussions like this, I see people skip the levels or layers of identity, and they kind of blur the lines and make certain layers synonymous with other layers when they're really not. And each layer has its very important purpose. And so I think that needs to be dwelt on more than we do, because like, for example, it was something that Shakara that you said that I wanted to comment. Oh, tribe. Like we use the word tribe a lot, and we say tribes in Africa. Africa consists of thousands of tribes and everything, and then we'll also interchange that word with ethnic group. Ethnic group and tribe become pretty much synonymous. But then we know that tribes, originally the word itself, the etymological meaning of the word goes back to Rome, to number three, the three tiers of Roman society, or whatever the case is. And people would take that and say, well, tribes is a Roman concept or a European concept. And by doing that, they miss the very point. And it's not the word tribe or where it come from. It's the fact that humans by nature have a tendency of having a belonging to, a membership, which is a layer of identity where we say we are we, or I am who I am, and you're not of me. And by us making that declaration or conceptualizing that, we are simultaneously creating a inclusion law and an exclusion law based on something. So, for example, if you don't speak my language, then you're not of me. If I don't speak yours, I'm not of you. And then if multiple people say that and do that, that speak the same language, would say, okay, we are a certain speech community. And so now I'm inclusive of a larger group. That's a human nature, period. So whether we say tribes or not, humans in all of human history have always done that and seen themselves as part of some group, a micro aspect of a macro. And so we had this macro micro relationship going on simultaneously at all times. And I think if we gain better understanding of that, then we'll start to pinpoint, in order for there to be a macro of micros, there has to be some commonality, some underlying things that are permeates all of it. And if we start to identify that, that's when, Sheikh Anta Diop's work and things, cultural, in all of his works and aspirations for us to identify those themes that underlie all of the differences. So we have, distinctions among the unity among the distinctions. And I'm just saying that I think that we can't oversimplify that. We shouldn't. And I think we need to really drill down and have a proper understanding of that. Even when having these conversations also.
All righty. Hold on. I want to welcome Brother. Oh, did he leave? I guess so. Well, we had Brother Falladay, Brother Joseph Falladay, but for some reason, every time he joins the first few times, he gets kicked out, I guess, for connection reasons. But before we move forward, I want to highlight this question from Sister Miss Tiffany, and any one of y'all can answer this question. What's the consensus on Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, for example? Are they just as African as other countries or seen as other? Go.
Okay, I was gonna respond to Brother Wajal first, if I may, Brother Asa.
No, answer the question. It didn't come back to your response.
Okay, no
Write
problem.
it down.
I respect the order. Well, I think that I personally would answer that. We give them the status that they give themselves. I don't think any of these groups are fighting to be African, except when it's politically expedient, when what they refer to as sub-Saharan Africans or Africans actually affirm assert some agency within Africanness, and they feel the need to disturb that. And we saw that recently, as far as I'm concerned, with the postponement of this happy conference. These are people that don't identify with African people, African culture. These are people that largely regard the culture of ancient Kemet to be pagan, heathen, kuffar, and so on and so forth. But it was politically expedient, in the face of some Africans asserting their Africanness, to don the robes of Africanness in that regard. So I think that when it comes to the idea of protecting a social, political, and cultural entity, that we have to understand that these nations are now currently dominated by what I would consider to be non-Africans, or at least culturally non-African.
All right.
So yeah, just on Brother Wajal's point, very quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but
no, go ahead.
When we're talking about tribe, we're not talking about the etymology of the terminology. We're talking about its utility as a product of the colonial project. Yeah, you will notice that nobody has heard the term tribal warfare on the news in the last month or so. All right, there's a reason for that. You notice that in history, whereas there were different groups of people with throughout Europe that could be referred to as tribes, generally speaking, I'm living in the UK. I learned about the Celts in history. Nobody ever referred to them as tribe. The Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, the Saracens, whoever it was, none of them referred to them as tribes. Yeah, so we understand and what the African Center cultural scientists have been able to extrapolate is the fact that the use of the term tribe within colonial anthropology, and bearing in mind that anthropology is a discipline that was birthed in the context of colonialism, has a particular context, and a particular context, especially when used in relation to African peoples, that is used to connote images of primitiveness, savagery, barbarity, and perpetual states of warfare, and so and it also.
You muted yourself.
Sorry, it also, as Dr. Faluke Adebisi says, obfuscates, the actual reality of communal relationships among African groups of people, and so we have to bear that in mind also.
Yeah, just a very quick response. I agree with you 100%, because that is definitely how the word tribe is utilized. You say utility, and that's exactly how it's utilized. It paints an image of primitiveness, basically the Hegelian view of people on the continent of Africa. So I agree with you 100%. But what I was speaking to is how people tend to use the fact that what you just said, that I agree with, to negate the fact that Africans on the continent actually did identify with in groups. So some people misuse the facts, the pejorative sense of the word tribe. They use that as an excuse to kind of negate the fact that Africans themselves across the continent did coalesce in groups separate from one another, even though they may have relationships. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, sometimes they fought, sometimes they were all good. And some people just blur that and ignore that. So that's the point that I was making with that.
Well, speaking of tribes, I'm going to need everyone in this tribe to... That is right. Hit the like button. And if you are not a subscriber to the channel, hit the subscribe button and make sure that you hit the bell so that you will be notified when we're having these deep and penetrating conversations. And I saw Sister Emmy Ket's mic open earlier, so we'll go to you.
I didn't address the question yet. I was just that was a quick thing to to show Shakara I was in agreement.
After you, we're going to go to Emmy Cat, and then I know Brother Issa's been waiting for a while, so go to him. So that order. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll just be quick. To Miss Tiffany's question, I think that question needs to be broken down. And the only reason I say that is because the countries she mentioned are African countries. They're on the continent, and by geography, they are African. So there's different layers, and I think that questions like that we need to answer it for each layer, and that's what I spoke to earlier. And so without long-winding that out, I'm saying geographically, obviously they're African, they're on the continent. In terms of what we identify as African, we tend to, and I think somebody on the panel mentioned this, we tend to, without saying it, we tend to look at sub-Saharan Africa as Africa, as what's African or not. And by that definition, or that kind of sense that people tend to use, then those countries she mentioned would be other. And I think that is actually the spirit behind her question. We even why that is a question, is because we tend to look at Africa as a subset of the continent itself. Like, we call a whole continent Africa, but then when we talk about Africa, we only talk about a portion of the continent. And that's that sub-Sahara, super-Sahara debate and things, Caucasian Africa versus Africa proper. We'll stick on these other adjectives and things like that. So in that sense,
and the whole true Negro hypothesis, that's
right.
That's the underlying thing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no. I don't want to long it out. So I'm saying, so I think questions like Miss Tiffany's question when addressed, it really needs to walk down all the layers that I pointed out. The fact that there are layers to all of these things,
But
levels.
should African Americans be considered Africans?
Now, that's a whole new question. So, but
In the same fashion of
if
the
you want to come back to
Morocco,
that,
Algeria, and the Afro-British,
Yes.
and the
Yeah,
Afro-Brazilians.
yeah, I was gonna actually answer that question, Miss Tiffany's question, but also bringing out what Asa just brought up because, um, I would actually say that first and foremost, when it comes to speaking for the Moroccans and Tunisians and Algerians or just North Africans, I would always say the best approach is always to actually let people speak for themselves. But in this kind of scenario, and I've seen it, and I've been on these discussions with a lot on Facebook, where it would be other people who would try to designate what the definition of an African is, and I will have case in point where it was about people in Sudan, not Sudan, of course, where in some discussions you would have people say that those people in North Sudan or the Republic of Sudan are not Africans per se. They're not like proper Africans. And then I would ask people the same question because I would ask them why they're not. They'd like, and then they were like, well, they're not 100% African, like the sub-Saharan Africans, because these people are mixed with with Arabs. And then I would ask, like, knowing very well that most people from the Republic of Sudan might be, when they take the DNA test, it might be 30%, from other Middle East countries, and then 70%, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa. So then I would say what I asked, after that would be, what about the African Americans who are not 100%? If you want to say there's 100% African, we don't know what that is though. But if there's 100% African, what about the African Americans who also would be around that same range of sub-Saharan African, and then 30% or 20% or 10% colonizer? Because in this case, there's a difference between a colonizer that's European and a colonizer that's Arabic. So what is the difference? Then everybody goes mute, because in that sense, then if we could say that if a diasporan African would designate somebody on a continent who's born on a continent, whose ancestors are born on a continent, but is not quote unquote 100% African, then what about the other African who's also not 100% African but not born on a continent? The recent ancestors really, compared to that, but the other example is not from the continent per se. Then how do you define that? And then people realize that everybody's just nilly-willing, all these identifications and not really understanding. Because even when you come to the Moroccan and the Algerian and things of that nature, when you're on the ground, those people see themselves, they understand they're on the continent, they're part of the continent, they involve themselves on continental things, whether it's kind of sports, economics, and all that kind of stuff. And again, people have to understand that the African Union involves those particular countries as well. So those people would actually see themselves as African. Obviously, every African understands that we are not the same. So, but they will still be, African. So in that sense, I would say that in this kind of questions, people have to be careful, with their idea of what an African is, because at the end of the day, everything could break apart with whatever definitions and the rules that we set. It's not applicable all the time. But the point is that those people are on an African continent. Those people have been born on the African continent, lived on the African continent, involved themselves with continental stuff. So to answer that question, I would say that yes, they are African.
Just to add, those same countries also involved themselves in the Arab League. And in many of those countries, there is discrimination against indigenous African peoples, or what is considered to be sub-Saharan African peoples. The differentiation between sub-Saharan and super-Saharan Africa was not created by people that we would describe to be Africans. It was created by Europeans and those people that currently dominate, right, to differentiate themselves. Yeah, so that's the point I'm making. It is not my experience, again, except for under the levels of political expediency, that said peoples refer to themselves as Africans in the way that other Africans might do, and identify their culture as African in the same that other Africans might do. That's not my experience, and I'm willing to submit to the idea that people may have different experiences. But again, I think if we're talking about letting them speak for themselves, I think there is a historical relationship, politically, socially, and economically, that we can see in North Africa, and the differentiations are very clearly set in that regard. So this is not Shakara imposing anything on anybody. It's identifying the conditions and the circumstances, and actually hearing from the people themselves, in that regard.
And I agree with that. That obviously they will find themselves also as and associate themselves with the Arab League, and that also comes from the fact that we have to understand that particular geographic location, the migration, and the history behind it. So those people are not going to actually take the stand that we are going to ignore this part of our history and not identify ourselves with this. I'm not, like other people do here, where people will be like, I'll ignore the other 20% European that I am, and then I'll be African. So those people obviously are, their history also is encapsulated within the Arabic world. So they are not. I've not said, and I don't think anybody will find those people denying that part of them or even being part of that. But the African part is also there, and they do acknowledge that. Otherwise, they would not find themselves within the African Union. They would not find themselves within African activities, economies, sports, and anything that goes of that nature. So I was just speaking of the African part. They do consider themselves, but with the history as well, they do acknowledge their other side. So that should be a given.
You all have just demonstrated my point about the layers, because everything you all said I agree with, but it's in the context of the different layers, and that's exactly what we have to do with all those kinds of questions.
Well, I was just going to pass it to Brother Issa, but it looked like he fell out again, and we have a new person on the panel. Simply going by the initials of OB. I want to welcome you to the Mbongi. And, we've said a lot in the past hour and 42 minutes. And just to let everyone know, I'm going to go for another 15 minutes or 17 minutes, 13, however it is, up until 7 o'clock. So we'll just make this 2 hours. So, but I want to give OB the floor. What's your comment, question, opinion or whatnot of what's been said?
Yeah, thank you. You hear me?
I can hear you kind of low, but we can still hear you.
Okay, can you hear me well now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for inviting me up. Good discussion. I heard the sister's point on some of the North Africans. I think that there's some validity to what she's saying, but I think it's really easy to almost conflate the case of Sudan with the case of Morocco, Tunisia. They're totally different populations.
True.
Sudan. Yeah, the people there, a lot of them clearly look African or black. And they've had a different type of political relationship with the southern Sudanese as compared to majority of people are, Berber or Arab, and they look a certain way, and any African presence is a very, very tiny minority. So that's a really big difference. And again, I just want to side with Shakara. I have never seen, I'll say it this way. When people from quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa say they're African, they are a lot of times making a cultural identical claim. That's not the same sense in which somebody who might live in Africa who's from Algeria is saying that they're African. It's a totally different sense. And I know that there's layers to it, but I don't think that it can. The average person in Algeria is not going to say they're African. Maybe somebody who's politically aware and might, for some type of reason, they might say that in a certain context, but they're not going to say I'm African. But somebody from Nigeria or Malawi can call themselves African in a cultural, day-to-day sense. They're saying a totally different thing. And I think sometimes we don't want to just accept that there's a serious distinction. But my sense is that it doesn't really matter if the people in North Africa see themselves as African. I think that when we have these discussions, we don't think enough about the practical reality of living in a modern sense. We don't have to have the same identity with anybody in any society, but the society is functioning. And so the people in Algeria and Morocco don't have to see themselves as African for them to exist with us or coexist with us and have a prosperous society. And so that's the point I want to share.
Okay, so if I can quickly respond to that. Now, Brother Obi, where do you reside?
I live in the United States.
Okay. So, and the only reason why I'm asking this is because I guess when everybody speaks, they speak from their point of their vantage point. Now, me having grown up on a continent, also having grown up in Denmark for the most part, and also UK and so forth. But for the most part, in Denmark, we do get in Denmark we are we migrate as Africans, and you have Africans from sub-Saharan Africa, and then you also have Africans coming in from North Africa, and that would actually have the majority of Africans considered Africans in Denmark would be actually from the northern part, and then from Nigeria. So from when I speak, I'm speaking from that particular vantage point, because the especially I've interacted a lot with Moroccans. Now Moroccans, when and I'm saying from a national perspective, they will say they're Moroccans, but they will also say that they're Africans, right? Or my experience, in Denmark, they will say that they're Africans. Now, when we put ourselves as Africans, then there's also those national where somebody say, okay, we can say, like you said, leadership. They don't look sub-Saharan Africa, obviously. So then the question will come, well, from what part of Africa are you from? And obviously, my quickest guess would be like somewhere from North Africa when I'm using my leadership. So that would be, and then they would explain, I am from North Africa, from Morocco specifically. So, but in those instances, they actually are aware of them themselves being African. So, and I just wanted to say that to kind of make sure that you understand that you can speak from your own vantage point, but you have to be aware of other vantage points as well.
It occurs to me that it doesn't matter.
Can I
sorry.
that?
Go ahead, bro. I'll wait.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, sister, but again, I think you didn't speak to my point. A person in North Africa saying that they're African is like a Chinese person referring to themselves as Asian. They don't refer to themselves as Asian, they refer to themselves as Chinese. In the context in which, like, they don't, when an African or a Black person refers to themselves as African, they are saying it in a sense as somebody who's Arabic, a certain culture. Like, it's not the same sense. That's what I'm saying. And I get your vantage point, but I think if you go to that point where they say they're African, it's okay. Let me say this, because we might not be disagreeing. I think the point I want to make
is there a way that you can I don't know what device, or if you're on a speaker or something, but you sound extremely low. and can barely hear you.
Okay, so why are you fixing your mic?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So I think I want to say this. Maybe we're not really disagreeing. I get the point you're trying to make. I think the point I want to make is, people from quote unquote Black Africa should not share. Like, if we're going to, we shouldn't identify as African in the sense that we shouldn't accept the identity that they make, because it's not the same context. Like, if somebody who's Moroccan says they're African, and I'm not going to say, yes, yeah, I'm African too. I'm going to say I'm something other than what you are, because it's not the same sense. A Chinese person would never say I'm Asian and then identify with the Japanese. They just don't do that. And that's the context that is, I think, really important. So
Yeah, okay. I think you're right on the point that we're not really disagreeing. I think what I'm trying to say is that if I could explain it clearly, the only point where that, for the person identifying themselves as African who is actually from the continent, the only point where that is invoked is when they're out of the continent. So when you're like me, when I'm in Kenya, I'm not going to say I'm African. It has no use, it has no value, it doesn't help describe anything at all on that in that particular context. I'm not going to meet somebody on the street when I'm in Nairobi and I'm walking and I meet somebody and then they say, where are you from? I'm not going to say I'm African. Obviously that would be considered rude as it is, because that the only thing that tells anybody is that you really do not want to have a conversation, basically. So that African, I am African is only comes into play once you're out of the continent.
but the point I'm making
Hold
is,
on.
when we're outside of the continent, there are two definitions: a Nigerian and a Ghanaian, a Kenyan and Ethiopian. When they say they're African, they don't mean the same thing as somebody who from Algeria or Morocco says it when they're outside of the continent. I say that as somebody who's from the continent but wasn't born there.
I would say that I would disagree and maybe agree on some context, because no, I haven't had an experience where let's say I am it's me, I'm a Kenyan, I'm sitting at a bar somewhere or a cafe somewhere in Dalston, somewhere in South in South of South London, and then there's a Moroccan next to me, and then when we say, well, where are you from? You say from Africa. Uh, it would not occur to me to think that person is not African, but for somebody else it might occur. So that's why I say that it is a yes and a no, and it will occur. And maybe the question is, why is that happening? For me, I would not have a problem.
Sister Emike, I feel obliged to correct you as an African born and raised in London. Dawson is in East London, my sister. East, yeah. I'm gonna say correct that, because I'm from East London. I'm only from
sorry. Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm over speaking. Yeah, I lived in Dawson. It is in East London. Sorry. Yeah, I should have said Brixton, but no. Okay, no. But yeah. So what else? Was that it?
No, you're not.
Okay. Let me correct that. No, let me correct. Okay, so yeah, so you're right. Dawson is in East London, and I've lived there a couple of years. So yeah, you're right. But I'm just saying that probably the question is, what would make, okay, let me ask you, what would make you what is it that would make you not identify a Moroccan person as African? If a Moroccan person came to you and then and said, I'm African, what would make you not accept that?
For me, the same thing that wouldn't make me accept it if a white person from South Africa said it.
But at the same time, we got to remember that there's no United States of Africa at this point. And when you're saying Africa and an African, it is only a geographical space. We're working towards it being more than just a geographical space, in the same way that Asia is just a label for a geographical space. But as OB had mentioned, China, Japan, India, etc., consider themselves different and only refer to being Asian when in Europe, Africa, in the United States, or Brazil, etc. I don't want to cut this short, but I want to make sure that I
Can I
get
make a quick response to
Faladay.
that?
Hold on, I want to get Faladay in. He's going to actually have the last word and comment, and then I'm going to close it out. So, Brother Joseph Faladay, the floor is yours.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Bless,
Doing
bless,
well.
bless.
Yeah, my name is Joe, and I'm sorry I've been cutting in and out because I don't know what's wrong with my internet, but it's pretty exciting to join this conversation, and yeah, I'm glad to be here. I don't know if you want me to talk now or you want them to finish um, talking about the African thing.
We have 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure that you get your commentary because you've been waiting for a minute.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna end the show. But,
Okay.
So you have the last word. So your opinion on what has been said, if you can sum it up and be as quick as possible.
Okay.
That'll be good. And
Okay.
then we're gonna have the after party at Miss Tiffany's house, and then Africa World is gonna bring the drinks. So go ahead, follow that.
Okay, so just to round it up, I don't want to waste too much time. I just wanted to add that the United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth at this point in time. And for example, there's a war going on in Europe. Russia, which is supposedly supposed to be the second most powerful nation on earth, has been reduced to a third world nation in a matter of weeks. Due to American sanctions and American pressure and American power. So I just want to state that America is the most powerful nation on earth, and African Americans are citizens of America. And they need to understand that they are, in turn, the most powerful people on earth. So what I just want to get across is African Americans need to use their power. Okay, in Africa, Europeans and Asians are going in and contributing because Africa does not have any capital. Like, for example, Nigeria that I'm from, I think a dollar is 300 and something naira. And a couple of months ago, I bought a piece of land for $800. I just want to give you a comparison. In America here, you buy that piece of land for about $200,000. So all this, instead of wasting time, we can bring this to a reality. All we have to do is, as African Americans, find a culture that you identify with in Africa. Go back home and identify and join a community. And trust me, Africans love Americans. Okay, if once you say you're American, they will open the gates. You go past any line. So there is no reason for us or for African Americans to waste time about what we need to do, what we don't need to do. Find a culture that you identify with, get initiated or join a community, invest in that community, and see your capital worth grow. Like, you can start a mall, you can do anything with just a little piece of dollars, and they will appreciate you, make you a chief. Instead of giving that to a Chinese man or a European man, they will give that to you, and then you in turn can give them the knowledge that you've been your pan-Africanism, because they don't really have that. They are struggling back home. They don't really have that. So that exchange is going to give us that black power that we've been talking about. And then we can go about anywhere and say, I'm black. Because don't forget, you're American. So your passport opens all gates. So when you say you're black anywhere, they will respect you because other black people are respectable. When they go to Nigeria, it's not trash. When they go to Kenya, it's not trash because they represent us as a whole. So we take them along, we invest, and then before you know it, Africans are not running to other countries and trying to take cultures. They are sticking their you are showing them the value in their culture, and they're appreciating their culture. So I just want to throw that out there just real quick, and just to summarize everything. But yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's going to be easier said than done. And some people are going to view that as abandoning, their history and culture. And I don't know if people are willing to give up Harriet Tubman.
No. You
I'm
should.
just saying. I'm just saying.
Yeah, like
And
you shouldn't.
Fannie Lou Hamer and Malcolm X and Wu-Tang Clan.
No, I was also even going to add that.
We play it forever. Even I know that, and I'm not an American.
Yeah, I was
Wu-Tang is
also going
forever,
to add that the idea of dual citizenship thing, there is no need to hurry for trying to be an African. Like, stick to being an American, because that's what has the power. The African thing, you can become an African citizen when you're like 50, because you want your children to be presidents of America. If you're a dual citizen of some African country, you cannot be the president. And that's what, like, the Obamas did. So when you have a child, when you do something with Africa, you're not trying to drop the power that you have, which is being an American citizen. No, you're not even trying to get dual citizenship, because it affects some things you need to do, unless you are ready to retire when you're 60, 70. But invest in Africa, use it to boost your power in America. You can have malls that are making dollars for you somewhere in some country, and you're building that community also.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to pick this conversation up at another time.
Indeed.
But I want to thank each and every one of you who are listening to the program and who are live and who are catching the archives of the program. I want to thank each and every single one of the panelists who came and joined the conversation today. Brother Shimsu Netcher, Brother Shaka Ra, Brother Wujaru, Sister Imiket, Brother Faladay, OB, and Brother Issa from coming out of the boonies and joining the conversation today. And if I missed someone, I do apologize. But again, the after party's at Sister Tiffany's house. And Brother Kofi is going to bring some snacks. It's going to be catered by Sister Tamika. And I do appreciate, again, each and every one of you for supporting the channel and continuing the conversation. And so with that said, I pray that y'all have a good week. This will be my last show for this week, because I'll be packing and all that good stuff. And I'll be headed on my way to Philadelphia, and so I can reign terror on the East Coast, as I always do. So with that said, y'all be blessed. Have a great rest of your weekend and good week, and keep the conversation going. All right, peace.